Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, President Biden holding his first solo press conference since taking office, addressing immigration, voting rights, and vowing to hold China accountable for unfair trade practices and human rights abuses. Former White House press secretary and Fox News contributor Kayleigh McEnany and Democratic strategist and co-host of The Five, Juan Williams, break down the key moments. Republican lawmakers are pushing back against a pair of infrastructure proposals from the Biden administration, which aim to fund clean energy priorities, including energy-efficient affordable housing and electric vehicle charging stations. Fox News correspondent Mark Meredith weighs in on the future of the solar industry and the process of converting solar energy into electricity. Plus commentary from Jimmy Failla, host of Fox Across America. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Martha McCallum.
I'm Bill Hemmer.
I'm Shannon Bream, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Friday, March 26, 2021. I'm Jessica Rosenthal. President Biden has held his first press conference, taking questions from reporters, including one about why journalists have not been able to see the border facilities where hundreds of migrant children are being kept.
It was a direct admission that it's just too bad at this moment to allow the American public to see.
Others gave the president and reporters high marks.
I think they wanted it to be clear that when it comes to Joe Biden, that they are willing to press him on the critical issues of the day.
I'm Chris Foster. Some farmers in Ohio are making big bucks through solar farming, letting energy companies use the land to install solar panels to make electricity. Not everyone thinks it's a good idea.
They're worried that this is going to negatively impact farming for generations to come. They're worried that this land basically being taken out by these solar farms because they're producing solar instead of crops will make it impossible for them to be able to lease more land to farm, that it's going to drive food prices up.
We speak with Fox News correspondent Mark Meredith.
And I'm Jimmy Failla. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
President Biden has held his first press conference on his 64th day in office. President Obama had his within a few weeks, and President Trump's first formal presser was in less than a month. No one asked why it had taken so long, but President Biden began his press conference by saying he's been focused on the pandemic.
Now today I'm setting a second goal, and that is we will, by my 100th day in office, have administered 200 million shots.
When it came time for questions, there were 10. Our own Peter Doocy was not among them. The questions focused on things like the border, the filibuster, China. When asked if he was willing to commit to transparency, to letting reporters be allowed in to see border facilities holding children, he responded,
I will commit when my plan very shortly is underway to let you have access to not just them, but to other facilities as well.
On the filibuster, he said he supported a talking filibuster, but said he agreed with President Obama that the filibuster is a relic of Jim Crow.
We're ready to get a lot done. And if we have to, if there's complete lockdown and chaos as a consequence of the filibuster, then we'll have to go beyond what I'm talking about.
When asked if he planned to run for re-election, he said that is his expectation, but he was then asked why he hadn't set up a re-election committee like his predecessor, President Trump, had done at this point. He said he missed his predecessor. He was then asked if he expects he'll run against President Trump in 2024.
Oh, come on. I don't even think about it. I have no idea. I have no idea whether there'll be a Republican Party.
Biden will be 82 in 2024. Among a handful of foreign policy questions, he gave a long answer on China, saying he believes he may have spent more time with Chinese President Xi Jinping than any other world leader, and that he plans to commit more money to science and research to compete with the Chinese. He said some Republican state efforts to reform elections is pernicious, and that he will fight to make recently passed House legislation on national election reform law.
There was a very low bar for President Biden. There's no doubt about that.
Kayleigh McEnany was White House spokeswoman under President Trump and is a Fox News contributor.
I think, the media is essentially saying that he passed that very low bar, when in fact, if you analyze what he said, he did not pass that bar. For instance, on the issue of immigration, he said that the vast majority of those coming to the border are being turned away. We have an Axios report saying, in fact, 87% of families are being let in and having their cases adjudicated in the country. So issues like that, which would not be so gratuitous in a Trump administration, it would have been called a lie, are just simply overlooked in today's mainstream media.
You've had to deal with your fair share of reporters asking questions. How do you think reporters did?
There were some reporters that rose to the occasion, Kristen Welker being one. She asked a very good question about transparency, and then she followed up after that question. And the question prior to her as well from ABC similarly kind of put President Biden in a spot on immigration. But, one thing I wish I would have seen more is all of the reporters to ask tough questions, unlike Caitlin Collins, who asked if he's going to run for re-election, but then come with follow-ups. And you kind of miss the caustic, vitriolic follow-ups you got in the Trump era, which is a good thing because I don't think that that's particularly helpful to the American people, but it is a noted contrast between the two administrations.
There were plenty of references to his predecessor by President Biden himself. He said he missed his predecessor when asked, why he hadn't set up a re-election committee like Trump had at this point. And when asked if he expected he'd be running against President Trump, he said, who knows if there will even be a Republican Party by then? What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, those are not the words of a great uniter. And in fact, that came after he took another swipe at the Republican Party, saying that the Republican Party was the party of division, when in fact it was President Joe Biden who called Republicans into the Oval Office, acted as if he cared about their COVID relief plans or compromises, and then essentially steamrolled them and moved forward with only Democrat votes. So I can assure him there will be a Republican Party. It will be a very robust one, of course, noting the great gains that were made in the Senate and in the House in the previous election.
President Trump used to talk about his relationship with leaders like Xi Jinping of China. President Biden said he spent quite a bit of time with Xi Jinping, but he criticized President Trump for not calling out China on human rights abuses, saying that we lose legitimacy around the world when we walk away from values like that. What did you think of that comparison?
That's absolute insanity. Maybe he wasn't paying attention, but I continually, when I was at the podium, always talked about the Uyghurs and the genocide being committed against them in the Xinjiang province. And those atrocities, we were unmistakable where we stood, the State Department as well. It was actually President Biden's press secretary in her first press conference that did not note right away, unequivocally, without hesitancy, that indeed it was a genocide. Later, the talking points evolved, and they did, in fact, acknowledge it. And I think the Biden Secretary of State had acknowledged it, so perhaps she was not familiar that he had. But my point would be it seems to be their administration that certainly out of the gate stumbled on the issue of human rights in China.
And what did you make of what President Biden said about the filibuster, saying he agreed with President Obama that it was a relic of the Jim Crow era, after saying that he would support a talking filibuster the way it was when he was in the Senate? Do you think that the filibuster is on its way out or in real danger?
It certainly is, and it seems to have become a relic of Jim Crow when it was no longer convenient for Joe Biden and the Democrats. It's interesting that he takes that tone when, in fact, just a few years prior, he was defending it ardently, as was his entire party during the Trump administration. So it's a glaring hypocrisy that I think people are well aware of, but it certainly seems vulnerable to filibuster, no doubt.
When asked about immigration and the surge, especially of minors, the president said he should be flattered that they're coming if they think that he's a nice guy, but that surges happen regardless of who is in office, just as one happened under President Trump. And then he said that President Trump's policies had a negative impact on law and human dignity, and that he does not apologize for rolling back Remain in Mexico or taking children from parents. My understanding is, while the president has rolled back some of President Trump's immigration policies, that unfortunate situation in which parents were taken from their children was changed during the Trump administration.
It was changed. That's right. And we know that initially happened because of something, not to get too deep in the weeds here, because of something called the Flores Settlement Agreement that unfortunately led to that. But President Trump, you're right, undid it. But I can tell you what is not humane is incentivizing children to cross the border, leave their parents because they're accepting kids who arrive alone, be the victims of coyotes, God forbid, sex abuse and physical abuse that we know these kids are oftentimes subjected to. That is not humane. And to double down on that policy of opening our arms to kids who arrive alone just incentivizes that. So it was a ridiculous statement by President Biden.
Finally, what did you make of his answer on transparency at the border, that he needs to implement his plan first before giving reporters access? I know there was a follow-up to that from Kristen Welker, but no one else really said, hey, why aren't we being allowed in? Why do you need your plan to be rolled out first?
Exactly. And I think to me that was the biggest shock and takeaway from the press conference is, to me, when I heard that, it's essentially an admission that it is so inhumane and overcrowded and so desperate and despicable conditions down there that he has to roll out his plan before he could ever let the cameras in. To me, it was a direct admission that it's just too bad at this moment to allow the American public to see. So that, to me, was the biggest takeaway and one of the most important moments of the press conference.
But some felt President Biden's answer was sufficient there. Juan Williams is a host on The Five.
Clearly, reporters want access to these facilities where the young people are being held at the moment. But the reason the answer was effective, I think, from the media perspective, from my perspective, is that there was an admission here that this is a process in flux, that things are not finalized, that they are trying to not only honor America's First Amendment values of press freedoms, transparency, and access, but also honor what's going on with these young people, that people do have some right to privacy in these difficult situations, and that the admission was that the Biden administration is still trying to get things right, but that according to the president at the press conference, they're going to get things right quickly and that access will be granted. So it didn't seem like an unreasonable statement.
Juan, let me ask you about the filibuster. It does require 60 votes in the Senate in order to bring a vote to the floor. And the president said he was in favor, it sounded like, of a talking filibuster to reduce the abuse of the filibuster. But when asked if he agreed with former President Obama that it was a relic of a Jim Crow era, he said yes. And he also said if there are too many, I guess lockdowns was the word in terms of debate, then we'll have to go beyond what I'm talking about, meaning a talking filibuster might not even be enough. It sounds like he may want to get rid of the filibuster.
Well, it sure sounded like he was open to that idea, but I think the emphasis from the president at the press conference was the talking filibuster would be allowed. That, in other words, you would diminish the idea that anybody can just pick up the phone and say they're doing a filibuster, and that it would therefore block legislation. One of the key points that he made on this was that the filibuster is being abused. And from the White House perspective, and actually from Democrats on Capitol Hill, from their perspective as well, what they all cite is that over the last 20 years or so, what we've seen is hundreds of use of the filibuster annually, whereas prior to that, it was something that was done once a year, and it wasn't done to stop legislation, but simply to slow things down and allow for more debate. Even as the president was talking about his next major legislative initiative, which is, Build Back Better and putting trillions of dollars into infrastructure, right, he was again talking about the need to avoid the filibuster.
Juan, he called voting laws that some Republicans are trying to pass in states despicable. He said that they make Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle, I think was the word.
Yes, exactly.
Those opposed to the House bill that would reform voting laws say, voting rules should really be set up by the states and allow what works for individual states. But it sounds like this president wants this House bill to pass and to have more, I guess, uniformity or agreement among states about how voting should work.
Well, I think this is a problem for the president because I don't think there's any question that the Founding Fathers and the Constitution and the way we do business even today is all about states being the determinators of how elections are run. It's up to the states. I mean, you think back to the controversial last election, it was having state electors send their decisions to Congress to be certified. The problem here is that we still have some people, especially on the Republican side, who hold the opinion that maybe the election was stolen, maybe there was some fraud involved, and they are cracking down in terms of, early voting, weekend voting, hours of voting, and that's now becoming something of a rage on the Republican side in states that are controlled by Republican legislatures.
Right.
And so you're seeing a response coming from the Democrats in Washington.
Finally, Juan, this was obviously a markedly different press conference than we have seen for the past 4 years with the prior president. I'm wondering how you think reporters did.
I think they did great. As I said, I think part of this press conference was really about the critics when I say the critics here, I'm saying the Republican Party in the aftermath of Donald Trump. I think on the one hand, they were trying to make sure that they were as aggressive with Biden as they had been with Trump, to make sure that people who are Trump supporters wouldn't say, oh, look at the press, they're just laid down for Joe Biden. Or secondly, I think they wanted it to be clear that when it comes to Joe Biden, that they are willing to press him on the critical issues of the day. And obviously that was immigration, that was guns, and that was COVID. And I think they covered all those issues.
Juan Williams, thank you so much for your time.
Jessica, my pleasure. I love doing it. Thank you for having me.
This is Jimmy Failla with your Fox News commentary coming up.
Part of President Biden's infrastructure plan includes investment through tax credits in renewable energy like solar. Already, utility companies are buying more of it, and scientists are working to make it cheaper and more efficient. Although solar panels have to be installed someplace, and energy companies are investing millions in solar farms on what has been actual farm land.
What we're looking at really is the future of what the solar industry wants to be.
Fox News correspondent Mark Meredith has been speaking with solar company executives and farmers leasing land to them in southwestern Ohio.
They are taking out hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of acres of farmland, and they're setting up rows and rows of solar panels. And really, it looks like something out of a science fiction movie, because you just have these solar panels aimed towards the sun that rotate throughout the day, and they are in these farmlands because it's flat, it's easy land for them to build on, and then they can easily hook these panels up into the grid, the electrical grid that's nearby. But what's interesting is that this energy is not what's going to be sent to the neighboring town. This is energy that's going to be used hundreds of miles away. And instead of it just being, a few solar panels here or there like we're used to seeing on rooftops, instead they're doing these mass facilities because they want to generate so much power. And the other factor that has really just exploded in all of this is that there is so much competition, not only for, the ability to create this kind of energy, I should say, but because they want to be able to have as much solar output as possible. So they need a lot of farmland to do it.
I mean, there are, before we get into the economic and environmental benefits, there are complaints with the idea with these solar farms popping up that they're just these ugly blights on what used to be a pretty open field or farmland. Do they strike you as an eyesore? If you live nearby, would it bother you?
I know, I'm a pretty low-key guy, but I guarantee you my wife would not want to live anywhere near any of these things. They are massive. They are, it's not just one or two panels covered by shrubs. I mean, you would drive by and you'd say, what is that? It looks like the Death Star. It is a massive field that is taking over here. However, where they are out is pretty rural. I mean, you don't have, big neighborhoods or, an office park or anything like that. They are in farming communities, but for the folks that live out here, they're not used to that kind of stuff. They're used to corn, they're used to soybeans and cattle. It's not every day you see solar farms out there. But the big benefit for these farmers that lease the land, that give they're getting paid handsomely to do this. But you can imagine if, across the street, you've decided not to do it, you're now looking at, at solar panels. I would imagine there would be a few people that would not be thrilled with that. But Chris, here's the other thing. It's not necessarily just the view that people are unhappy about. They're worried that this is going to negatively impact farming for generations to come. They're worried that this land basically being taken out by these solar farms because they're producing solar instead of crops will make it impossible for them to be able to lease more land to farm, that it's going to drive food prices up, that there's not going to be the same generational output that we have seen from years past.
Yeah, I mean, what happens to the land as farmland if this technology, say it never really catches on, or eventually moves on to something else?
That's a great point, because the solar companies, they are leasing out farmland and hundreds of acres of this for 30 years. So they are making an investment. They say that they want to take up this land. They're leasing, not buying for most cases, for 30 years. And the solar companies told us, yes, that at the end of the day, 30 years from now, this land will basically be returned, that they'll be able to, bring it back to the farm conditions that they were, that they'll take the panels out and plant. There are some farmers that are skeptical that that would happen. A lot can change between the next 3 days, let alone 30 years from now. And there is that some people have told us they're worried that if these solar farms were to go out of business, let's say that the solar technology is not the next big thing, that something else happens, maybe these would be left there to decay. the solar companies we spoke with push back against that pretty hard, saying that they have a way to get this cleaned up. But you also have to wonder about the farmland. For 30 years, you don't grow anything. 30 years, you have a bunch of panels covering this ground. I can't imagine that, corn is just going to, pop back up in the year after. But, of course, a lot can change between now and then.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these farmers, I'm sure, are saying, look, it's my land to do with what I want. Maybe I'm not farming soybeans, but I'm making a profit. And not only that, because, like you said, these leases are locked in, you're now not worried about weather or other natural disasters or demand or a trade war. You have this predictable
Exactly.
income.
I mean, farming is not... Yeah, you're right. Farming is not an easy industry. Anybody who's done it will tell you that. And, basically you're being offered for the next 30 years guaranteed income. You would imagine for a lot of people that's pretty hard to turn down. And it's not just a few bucks. I mean, people are making serious money by leasing out their farmland because there's also competition for the land. These solar companies are not just putting them anywhere. They need a specific type of terrain. They want to do it areas that are hooked up to the electrical grid. Where we are in Southwest Ohio, they can send this energy out to Illinois, to New Jersey. They're able to really connect it and send it out in places that need more output.
At the risk of sounding very rudimentary here, have you learned much about how these farms actually collect and distribute solar power? I mean, we know it's energy from the sun, but how is that converted to electricity?
The way that these solar panels are set up in row after row, they're basically collecting that energy, and then it's up converted in a box, and then transferred underground into another system that moves it into the power grid. It is it's not like you'll see if it was a coal fire plant where you'll see the stuff coming out at night. I mean, you would never notice it except if you were to see the panels themselves. They hide a lot of the wiring underground, and at least these are new facilities, right? They're using new technology. It's not as distracting as it may have been 20, 30 years ago in terms of what's there. But to your point, for these solar farms, they are massive. It's not one or two panels. There are thousands and thousands of panels. So if you are out there, you can't help but look at it. It is noticeable. It doesn't matter how many trees or shrubs are planted. You will definitely notice them out there.
How does it work? Is this solar energy companies selling to utilities, or utilities setting this up for themselves, or what?
These are these are a few different things here. The energy company that we spoke with yesterday is a Canadian company called Energex, and they basically are able to offer this out to companies that have been asking for green energy. A lot of companies out there are making commitments that they want to be sustainable with clean power by X year or in a certain amount of time. So they are working with those. I understand that there's some of these other solar farms that are working to put output to different state electrical grids. I mean, we all remember what happened with Texas with the storm, a few weeks ago, and you would imagine that there's going to be more of a demand for, a stronger energy grid. While there's a lot of people questioning what happened in Texas and what needs to happen going forward, these energy companies see a big future in solar, and that's why they continue to make this investment. They also told us that the what it costs to get the output of energy they are doing has gone down significantly. So what would cost, let's say $1, 10 years ago is now only costing 10 cents. So for them, it makes much more sense to invest in solar now because they see the prices only going down in the future, and it allows them to also meet the commitment that many places want for clean energy.
Yeah, I mean, a criticism of solar and wind, for that matter, in the past, is that it takes a lot of energy and a lot of money just to set up and maintain this, and maybe you had to spend, $1.20 to get it. I'm making this up, but $1.20 to get $1 worth of electricity, and now you've said those prices have just dropped so much where it is competitive with coal, for example.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where these companies are investing millions and millions of dollars. It'd be hard to believe that they would invest it if they didn't see a future in it. But to these, these other people's concerns, who's to say that solar is going to be the, guaranteed energy of the future? I mean, there certainly has been so many rapid advancements in technology. You could imagine that there would be something else that would be competing along with it. But these solar companies do see an opportunity here, and with costs being what they are now, that they've gone down so much, they're able to say, we can make this worth our while and also make it worth the while of the farmers that we're leasing land from. But these other farmers that are saying no to this also just fear, what's to say that they don't go out of business? And then what do? I mean, you've got these solar panels now in your yard, and it's, if a business goes out of business, they're not just going to come by and pick them up. So there has been some concern of that, but nobody knows for sure what the future is going to bring.
Yeah, and it's not like you can just leave these out with the recycling. I mean, there's got to be a process to get rid of this stuff. Now, my understanding is that President Biden's infrastructure plan is going to include some pretty nice tax breaks for renewables. Is that factoring into this boom?
The solar industry certainly sees a lot of enthusiasm coming out of the White House, and they've told us that before, that they really see this as a chance to grow their industry. They felt that perhaps the last 4 years they weren't getting the support they needed to really grow what they wanted to do. It's still early in the administration. I mean, obviously, we'll have to see what Congress comes up with this infrastructure bill. The president's going to be, speaking a lot more to that within the weeks ahead. But the solar industry, what we're seeing, at least here, is not waiting for the government to say, this is the route we want to go. They see this as a private enterprise able to, create a marketplace for this.
Yeah, and for all the, concerns of people in coal and oil, those industries and those communities, we're saying, well, they might be saying, well, geez, now President Biden is picking winners and losers, and we're the losers here. But if the technology is getting that much better and that much cheaper, this just could be natural selection.
And you'd be amazed where we are in Southwest Ohio. I have seen Trump flags everywhere. You would never think that the election was last November. I mean, this is as pretty much solid red as you can imagine. These are conservative voters by and large, but they also say, with the money that is being offered, and when they say this is what we're being offered, how do we turn this away? I mean, this is guaranteed income for 30 years. You would imagine for a lot of these people, money talks.
Well, Mark, I'm going to end with this. Instead of a red state, maybe Ohio's turning into a green state. How do you like that? How do you like them apples?
Yeah, it's still the Ohio State. That's for sure. One way or the other.
Thanks,
Chris,
Mark,
for having us.
Yep, thank you, Mark. Mark Meredith in Mount Orab, Ohio. Thanks for coming on, Mark.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
I'm Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist, and I'm inviting you to join a new conversation with the smartest thinkers out there about the country and where we're going. Subscribe to the Ben Domenech Podcast.
Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
And now, some good news with Tonya J. Powers.
The historic theaters of Broadway have been silent for more than a year, closed when New York City became the U.S. epicenter of the pandemic. But now there's a plan to bring those stages back to life. Mayor Bill de Blasio says the city will set up dedicated vaccination sites specifically for the theater community and the theater industry. It will be staffed by workers from the theater industry, and there's also a plan for a mobile unit to serve off-Broadway theaters, as well as testing sites at or near theaters. There are still a lot of things to be worked out, and full-scale plays and musicals aren't expected to open again until after Labor Day. But for theater-starved crowds and tourists who plan trips to the city that include a Broadway experience, that's good news. In New York, Tonya J. Powers, Fox News.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Jimmy Failla.
What's on your mind?
So New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is being accused of getting priority COVID testing for his family and friends. And I know what you're thinking. Wow, that's shocking. I can't believe Cuomo has friends. The crazy part is that for any other politician, this is a monster scandal. But this will be lucky to crack the top 5 with a dirtbag like Cuomo. The Love Gov is being accused of harassing 8 women, covering up 15,000 nursing home deaths, and threatening a Democratic lawmaker who refused to defend him. Letting his family cut the COVID test line is like OJ double parking at Nicole's house. Yes, Cuomo is a me-first garbage guy who's the worst thing about politics. Arrogant, ignorant, and shameless. But I can't get too mad about this because let's be honest. If any of us were in charge of the government, we'd be hooking up our families with special COVID options too. Maybe not all of them, but at least the cool ones. Congrats to Andrew Cuomo's pals on their special treatment. It's nice to know that Garth Brooks isn't the only one with friends in low places. I'm Jimmy Failla.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
Hey, it's Brett Larson, inviting you to download and listen to the new daily Fox on Tech podcast. There's part of a colorful late 90s iMac on Mars. It's an idea that seems a lot like Kickstarter, called Build It. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.